Good morning. Today we're going to finish the book of 1 Samuel. We'll be looking at chapters 28 through 31. And chapter 28 begins with words, "In those days the Philistines prepared their armies, gathered their horses for war to fight against Israel." And David was living in this area of the Philistines. He had, talked to this Achish, who was the leader of this one area, about having a city, and it was okay. So David was also pressed then into service with the Philistine army to be warring against Israel. And as they gathered the whole army, as we read through chapter 28, I'm going to skip to the end of the chapter and then come back, but as they are gathering the whole army of the Philistines, I guess it's actually in 29, where David and his men, as they parade by in front of all of the commanders, these commanders see this group of Hebrews within the army. And they say, well, isn't this David? Isn't this, there's no way he's going to be a part of our army, because what's going to keep him from turning against us in the middle of the battle? So they send David and his 600 men back home. But now to get back into chapter 28, the middle of Saul has inquired of the Lord. First of all, in verse 3, there's a reminder that Samuel has died, and we know that. But it's here to remind us also that at the time of Samuel's death, Saul had expelled all of the mediums, all of the wizards, and anybody that could foretell the future or, these different things that way. And so Saul inquired of God about going up to battle against these Philistines and got no answer. God didn't answer him. God didn't speak to him. Didn't matter what he tried to do. He didn't have a dream. He didn't have Urim and Thummim and saw nothing, no response from God. So Saul decides, I need to go talk to a medium. And he has his servants go search one out and find one. And of course, they've all been expelled, so you got to go a ways to find one, or maybe this one that they find was working very secretively. But Saul disguises himself and goes and says to her, I need you to bring up a spirit for me. And she says, well, you know that Saul has, laid down a death threat on any of us, and when we put to death, and Saul assures her that she'll be okay. And he asks then, or she asks, what do you want me to do for you? And he says, I want you to bring up a spirit. And well, who? Well, Samuel. But so the woman gets into her trance, whatever she does, and it says, in verse 12, she cries out with a loud voice, why have you deceived me? You are Saul, because she has seen Samuel, and he's there. But Saul again, assures her, no harm will come to you. Verse 15, Samuel comes, and he's sitting he's wrapped in a robe, and Saul knows it's Samuel, and Samuel says, what are you bothering me about here? This is what I told you, that you have sinned against God, you have turned against God, and God is going to abandon you. So why now are you seeking me out? Why are you thinking that I'm going to be able to help you or do anything? So Saul gets no satisfaction from his asking of Samuel, other than Samuel says to him, tomorrow you will join me. Meaning that, Samuel's dead, meaning that tomorrow Saul will die as well. And he prostrates himself on the ground, and this medium tries to get him to eat. He refuses, but in the morning she prepares a meal, and Saul and his servants all eat. And then in chapter 29, just, that brief summary of, David and his men being sent home from this army of the Philistines because the Philistine commanders just don't really trust him. Chapter 30, David and his men get back to their home, to Ziklag, on the third day, and the Amalekites, a different bunch of people had made a raid there. And, they were another warring factor, people they weren't getting along with. And these people, these Amalekites had destroyed the city. They captured all the women and the children and were assured that they didn't kill anybody. They just captured everybody. You know, there weren't any fighting men left there. And so they're all upset with David, and David, of course, too, is upset because his wives and children are also gone. And David says to the priest Abiathar in verse 7, "Bring me the ephod." So Abiathar brings it. And David inquires of the Lord, "Shall I pursue?" And the Lord answers, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake, and you will surely rescue." So here David, Saul had inquired of God, and God hadn't answered. But David inquires of God, and God answers, "Pursue, go for it. I'm going to be with you," is what God is saying to David. And so David and his men set out, and they get out in the middle of nowhere, kind of, and they find this man there. He's an Egyptian, and he's been very sick. He's very weak, but they feed him, give him some water, and he revives, and they find out that he was a servant of one of these soldiers in this army. And David asks, "Well, can you guide me to where they are?" And he says, "Yes, I can, if you'll promise not to return me to my master, that I may," and yeah, that's a good deal, So this man leads David and his 400 or 600 men on the way. And as they're going, these men have been marching. It took them 3 days to get home, and now they're marching after this other group of soldiers, and 200 of David's men are tired. So David lets them sit back, and so these 200 men stay back, and the other 400 go with David, and they defeat the Amalekites. They get all of the women and children back again. But then in verse, what is it? In verse 22, the corrupt and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, "Well, they didn't go with us. We're not going to give them any of the spoil, other than that a man may take his wife and children." But David says, "You shall not do this, because what the Lord has given us, He has preserved us and handed us over to the raiding party. And the share of those who stayed back is going to be the same as the share of those who went. And this is going to be, forever." And so it's the deal that, the men that stay back to protect or to guard or to do whatever are going to get the same spoils as those that went to war that way. But when David and his men get back to this Ziklag, the town that they had lived in, he sends part of the spoil, that says, to his friends, the elders of Judah, "A present for you." And then in chapter, so David, it's all for one and one for all type deal, like the Three Musketeers. We're in it together, and we got to remember that we're in it together, and we all support each other in all ways. Chapter 31, the Philistines again come against David. I guess I skipped over in chapter 29 as wherever it was. But in one of these in there, as Saul was going to battle, his sons were all killed in this battle, and Saul was wounded, and his servant didn't want to, finish Saul, put him to death. So Saul fell on his sword, and his servant also. No, that's in chapter 31. I didn't skip anything. I just am forgetting what I read. But anyway, they come and they find Saul dead, and they cut his head off, and send messengers throughout the land, carrying the good news of all of this, that they have defeated Saul and what they've done to Saul. And they take the body of Saul and of his sons and parade them around. And so chapter 31 ends with the defeat and the death of Saul. And that David has, he's persevered with his men, and have returned back to their home base that way. You know, one of my footnotes, I think it said that, you know, Saul comes to a noble and tragic end. I don't know how noble really his end was, but I guess to die in battle was much more noble than to remain at home and die of something else. But it's just, you know, as we read these, you know, it's just another reminder to me of, you know, of war and battle and killing. I mean, it's just such a back and forth. It never really settles anything. And no one, you know, the leaders are not content with their spoils if they're gained more, and the people aren't content either. And it's just, you know, more example of the discord, the disharmony between peoples and things of earth. And you know, it's just, Saul had fallen out of favor with God because he didn't follow God, didn't listen to God, didn't do as God had said. And, you know, in today's world, I mean, there are many who don't do as God would have them do, but yet I truly believe that God is ready, willing, and able to forgive each and every one at any time. And this is the promise in Jesus Christ, is that we have forgiveness in his name.